In the middle of a silent classroom, every gaze pulled back like a retreating tide, leaving behind a boy in a torn white shirt, hands stained with dried blood, back pressed against the wall. No one dared touch him. They whispered, "The Mafia's son." When the poor teacher, who had just arrived, Audrey Bennett, set down her canvas bag, she didn't ask questions. She knelt down, opened her arms, and held the trembling boy tight. In that moment, the school held its breath, and an empire began to shake. Riverside Academy sat on the border between wealth and fear, its marble hallways polished to a mirror shine, security cameras tracking every corner. Parents arrived in black sedans, their power visible in press suits and hushed phone calls. The school prided itself on excellence, on order, on reputation above all else. Principal Constance Whitaker made that clear every morning assembly. Achievement over truth. Silence over scandal. Audrey Bennett was 28 years old and didn't belong in a place like this. Her canvas bag had faded to the color of old bread, her coat was 2 winters past its prime, and her mother's medical bills sat unpaid in the drawer of her studio apartment 6 miles away. She'd taken this temporary teaching position because the pay was just enough, because her mother needed medication, because sometimes survival meant walking into rooms where you weren't wanted. But Audrey had a philosophy written in the small notebook she carried everywhere. Kindness with discipline, not weakness disguised as compassion, but intentional care backed by boundaries. On her first day, she wrote it on the classroom board in careful letters. Kindness is not weakness. The students stared at her like she'd written in a foreign language. Leo Moretti was 7 years old and had stopped speaking 6 months ago. Not completely, the school counselor Serena Hall explained in the quiet of the faculty lounge, but selectively. He chose silence the way other children chose words. His father was Dante Moretti, a name spoken in careful whispers, a man whose business dealings stayed veiled behind legitimate fronts and lawyers who billed by the minute, the kind of man whose son no one dared touch, even when the boy bled. Leo sat by the window in every class, folding paper into airplanes with precise creases, his small fingers moving with the concentration of someone much older. His eyes tracked clouds, birds, anything that moved outside the glass. Inside, he was a statue. Dante Moretti wore dark suits tailored to precision, a silver watch that caught light like a warning. At 42, he'd built an empire on control, on calculated moves, on the principle that love meant protection, and protection meant distance. He'd lost his wife 3 years ago, circumstances the police called suspicious, and he called unbearable. And since then, he'd wrapped his son in layers of guards and silence. Finn Cole was one of those guards, a man of few words and rigid principles who stood outside Leo's classroom with arms crossed and eyes that missed nothing. When Audrey first walked past him, he didn't move, but she felt his assessment like a hand on her shoulder. Corbin Russo, Dante's second in command, believed softness was liability. He was cold where Dante was controlled, practical where Dante was protective. He watched Audrey from the first day with the eyes of someone calculating risk. Detective Henry Blake watched them all. He'd been building a case against Dante Moretti for 2 years, following money trails and witness statements that dried up before they reached a courtroom. He didn't know yet that the real story would begin with a hug. The incident happened on a Tuesday during recess. Leo stood near the climbing structure, paper airplane in hand, when another boy, emboldened by the crowd, shoved him. Not hard, but enough. Leo went down, palms scraping concrete, and the other children scattered like startled birds. The boy who'd pushed him froze, suddenly remembering what his parents had whispered at dinner. Stay away from that one. His father is dangerous. Don't get involved. Leo sat on the ground, blood welling from a scraped palm, and no one moved. Audrey was across the playground, monitoring the swings, when she heard the silence. That particular quiet that means something has gone wrong. She turned, saw the circle of children backed away, saw Leo on the ground, and she moved. Not quickly, which might have startled him. Not slowly, which might have looked like hesitation. She moved with the steady pace of someone who decided that fear was not going to make her choices. She knelt beside him, at his eye level, and spoke in a voice that was calm and clear and matter-of-fact. "Let me see your hand." Leo looked at her with eyes that held too much wariness for 7 years. "I'm going to clean this," she said. "It might sting a little, but I'll tell you before anything happens." "Okay." He didn't nod, but he didn't pull away. She took out the small first aid kit she kept in her bag, cleaned the scrape with careful efficiency, applied pressure to stop the bleeding, wrapped it with gauze. Her hands were steady, her voice a low rhythm of explanation. "Now I'm wiping the dirt. Now I'm checking for gravel. Now I'm wrapping it twice." When she finished, Leo looked at his bandaged hand, then at her face, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper airplane. He placed it in her palm and stepped back quickly, like someone who just passed a secret message across enemy lines. Audrey unfolded it later, in the empty classroom after school. Inside, in careful pencil, "Thank you." It was the first communication Leo had made in 6 months. The parents complained by Thursday. 3 of them, standing in Principal Whitaker's office, with voices that managed to sound both worried and threatening. "That teacher," they said. "She's too involved. She's crossing lines. Our children shouldn't be exposed to that family's problems." Constance Whitaker, who valued donations and silence in equal measure, called Audrey in that afternoon. The meeting lasted 12 minutes. The message was clear. Observe. Document. But do not engage. Do not touch. Leo Moretti. Do not create situations that might anger his father or worry our families. Audrey left the office with her canvas bag and her small notebook, and the knowledge that she'd already broken the rule that mattered most. That night, she slipped an extra bandage into Leo's desk drawer, tucked inside a folded piece of paper that said simply, "I'm here." The reading assessment was scheduled for Monday morning. Every child would read aloud, 3 minutes each, while Audrey marked comprehension on the district rubric. The room smelled like pencil shavings and the artificial apple scent from the wall plug-in. Leo's turn came forth. He stood, walked to the front, held the reading passage in hands that had started to shake. Sweat appeared on his palms, soaking into the paper. The other children watched with the fascinated horror of witnesses to a car crash. Leo's mouth opened. Nothing came out. His breathing quickened, chest rising and falling in the rapid rhythm of panic. The whispers started, quiet but cutting. "He can't do it. He's weird. My mom said he's dangerous." Leo backed into the corner, sliding down the wall until he was sitting, knees drawn up, head down. The classic posture of someone trying to disappear. No one moved. They'd learned not to. Audrey set down her rubric. She crossed the room, not rushing, and knelt in front of him. She lowered herself until she was below his eye level, making herself smaller, less threatening. "Leo," she said quietly, "when you're ready. Not before. Only when you're ready." He looked up, eyes wide and dark and drowning. She opened her arms, slowly, and said the words that would change everything. "May I?" He stared at her for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Then he nodded. Barely. A movement so small it was almost imaginary. Audrey wrapped her arms around his shoulders and upper back. The safe points of contact, creating pressure without invasion. She held him the way you hold something precious and breakable, with intention and respect and absolute steadiness. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm here. You're safe." Leo's hands, after a moment, gripped the fabric of her sleeve. Not pulling, just holding on. The classroom had gone completely silent. The security camera in the corner recorded everything. By lunch, the footage would be on Principal Whitaker's desk. By evening, it would be on Dante Moretti's phone. When Audrey finally released him, Leo's eyes had cleared slightly, the drowning look receding. He didn't try to read. She didn't ask him to. She just stood, offered him a hand up, which he didn't take, and said, "Tomorrow's another day." That night, someone knocked on Audrey's apartment door at 9:47. She looked through the peephole and saw Finn Cole, the guard, and a woman in an expensive suit she recognized as Bridget Kane, Dante's family attorney. She opened the door but didn't invite them in. Bridget held out an envelope. "Mr. Moretti appreciates your concern for his son. He asks that you accept this as thanks and refrain from further physical contact." Audrey didn't take the envelope. "I don't touch him to claim him. I touch him to give him back his sense of safety." Finn's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or respect. "Mr. Moretti was very clear," Bridget continued. "Then tell Mr. Moretti," Audrey said, "that his son needs connection more than he needs distance. And I don't take money for doing my job." She closed the door. The next morning, her car windshield was smashed. Glass glittered in the apartment parking lot like scattered stars. Serena Hall, the school counselor, urged her to file a police report. Audrey took photos, saved them to a cloud folder, and drove to school anyway, cold wind whistling through the broken glass. The hallway confrontation happened before first period. Audrey was carrying an armful of workbooks when she turned a corner, and Dante Moretti was there, alone, filling the corridor with the kind of presence that makes air feel heavier. "What do you want from my son?" His voice was quiet, which made it more frightening than if he'd shouted. Audrey met his eyes. "To let him be a child. You don't know what that means in our world. I know what it means in his." She shifted the workbooks in her arms. "I saw the dried blood on his wrist yesterday. The bandage was applied correctly. That means someone taught him first aid, or someone cared enough to do it right. You protect him from everything except silence." Something crossed Dante's face, too quick to name. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw what people meant when they said his eyes were dangerous, not because they were cruel, but because they were calculating, measuring, deciding who deserved to exist in his son's world. "Stay away from him," he said finally, but his voice had lost its edge. Over the next 3 weeks, Audrey implemented what she called the 3 words, 3 breaths method. It wasn't official curriculum, wasn't approved by the district, but Serena Hall quietly supported it, and Constance Whitaker pretended not to notice. The system was simple: mouth, sound, courage. 3 words Leo could think about when panic rose. 3 deep breaths in and out. Then the choice to try, or the permission to wait. She gave him tools: a reading stick to track words without speaking them aloud, emotion cards with faces showing different feelings, so he could point instead of explain, a notebook they called the feeling journal, where green meant safe, yellow meant uncertain, red meant alarm. And she gave him a ritual: safe touch, but only when he initiated it. She taught him the signal: a small nod when he wanted contact. And she always asked permission out loud before following through. "I'm here," she'd say, and that phrase became their code for trust. Progress came in fragments. Leo started nodding yes or no to questions, then shaking his head, then pointing to words on the communication cards. The paper airplanes continued, folded messages that appeared on her desk. "Thank you for waiting. Today was green. If lions forgive, can people too?" That last one made her pause. She told the class a story about a lion who'd been wounded by a hunter, and later had the chance for revenge but chose to walk away. Leo had been staring out the window during the story, but apparently he'd been listening. She photographed the message and saved it, not knowing it would matter later. The breakthrough came in week 4. Audrey was helping Leo with his math worksheet when his finger brushed the sleeve of her cardigan, deliberate and light. Half a step forward from silence toward whisper. Then the video leaked. Someone, probably a parent with access to security footage, posted 30 seconds of the classroom hug online. The caption called it inappropriate, concerning, a violation of boundaries. The comments multiplied like bacteria. By Monday morning, 6 families had demanded Audrey's termination. Principal Whitaker called an emergency meeting. The school board was involved. The words investigation and suspension kept appearing in emails with red exclamation points. And Corbin Russo, seeing opportunity in chaos, pushed Dante hard. Cut her loose. She's a liability. The attention she's bringing will expose us. But Dante was watching Leo in the mornings now, secretly, through the one-way glass of the observation room Serena had given him access to. He watched his son, who hadn't smiled in 6 months, almost smile when Audrey entered the classroom. He watched Leo unfold a paper airplane and carefully place it on her desk. The attack came on a Thursday after school. Riverside Academy sat near territory borders, where rival operations sometimes sent messages. A car full of men from a competing organization pulled up as Leo's security detail was loading him into the SUV. Not a hit, not an abduction. Just intimidation, shouting, posturing, blocking the vehicle to make a point. But it was enough to trap Leo in the crossfire. Audrey was walking to her car, keys in hand, when she heard the commotion. She saw the black vehicles, saw Leo pressed against the SUV door, saw Finn reaching for his weapon. She didn't think. She moved. She ran across the parking lot and inserted herself between Leo and the confrontation, her body a shield that made no logical sense. She put her hands on Leo's shoulders and spoke in that same calm, clear voice. In, 2, 3, out, 2, 3. The breathing code, the panic management. She pulled him backward, toward the school's side entrance, the music room that had a lock on the inside. Leo followed, stumbling, his small hand finally gripping hers. Behind them, Finn and the other guards de-escalated the situation with the cold efficiency of professionals. The rival crew drove away, no shots fired. But phones had recorded everything. By evening, the story was everywhere. News vans arrived. Teacher saves mob boss's son. The narrative was too perfect, too dramatic. Constance Whitaker released a statement, calling it exaggeration. Dante Moretti released no statement at all, and Detective Henry Blake showed up at the school on Friday with questions about whether Audrey had orchestrated the whole thing for publicity. But in the locked music room, in those 3 minutes of crisis, Leo Moretti had looked into Audrey Bennett's eyes and taken the deepest breath she'd ever seen him take. And when they finally opened the door, he was still holding her hand. The meeting at Dante's estate came through Finn, not Bridget. He wants to see you. Tonight. It's not optional. But it's not a threat. Audrey went because refusing felt more dangerous than accepting. The house was exactly what she expected. High walls, security cameras, rooms that echoed. But Dante led her to a smaller space, a study with walls covered in photographs. His wife, alive and laughing, in images that tracked a decade of love. And in the corner, a newer photo. Leo at 6, before the silence, holding his mother's hand. She died in an accident, Dante said, though they both knew accident was a word that could mean anything. Corbin was driving. He said the brakes failed. The mechanic said it was random. 1 in a million. Audrey waited. Leo was in the back seat. He saw everything. He stopped talking the next day. And you've been protecting him from everything since, Audrey said quietly. I pay the world in control, Dante replied. It's the only currency I have. And Leo pays in silence? The question hung between them like smoke. Dante crossed to the window, looked out at grounds lit by security floodlights. You don't know what my world does to people who show weakness. To children who show weakness. I know what your protection is doing to him right now. He turned, and for the first time she saw past the armor. I don't know how to be different. Start, she said, by letting him see you cry. Something broke in Dante's face. Not completely, but enough. He looked at the photo of his wife, at the picture Leo had drawn in art class that week. A portrait of a woman with yellow hair and a sun smile that Audrey had pinned to the classroom hope board. No one has touched him in 6 months, Dante said. Before you. That's why he's drowning. Dante was quiet for a long time. Then, "No one touches the teacher. Anyone who threatens her answers to me." But Corbin Russo had already made different calculations. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Corbin, working with a dirty cop in Detective Blake's unit, planted evidence that Audrey had contacted rival organizations, seeking payment for information about Leo's routine. They fabricated emails, doctored metadata, built a narrative about a struggling teacher who saw opportunity in a vulnerable child. The story leaked the same day. Teacher accused of planning kidnapping. Audrey was leaving school late Wednesday evening, rain starting to fall, when her phone buzzed with news alerts calling her a criminal. By the time she reached her car, news vans were circling. By the time she tried to drive away, her tire mysteriously went flat. Leo was with her. He'd stayed late, helping her organize books, a routine they'd fallen into. Now they were alone in a parking lot filling with rain and reporters and something darker moving at the edges. Audrey saw the car with tinted windows, moving too slowly, saw Finn's security vehicle blocked by a media van, saw the trap closing. "Come on." She grabbed Leo's hand and ran toward the one place she knew would be unlocked after hours. The old church next to the school property, abandoned but not demolished, waiting for renovation that never came. They ran through rain that turned the concrete slick. Behind them, footsteps. Corbin's men, or rivals taking advantage of chaos, or dirty cops erasing loose ends. It didn't matter who. What mattered was the church door, and Audrey's hand finding the loose handle, and the two of them stumbling into darkness that smelled like old wood and mold. Audrey locked the door, then braced it with a fallen pew. The windows were high and broken, rain coming through in streams. She found candles in the vestry, probably left by homeless people seeking shelter, and lit 3 with hands that shook. Leo stood in the center of the nave, water dripping from his hair, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. "I'm scared," Audrey admitted, not to protect him from truth, but to show him that fear didn't mean breaking. And Leo, who hadn't spoken clearly in 6 months, who'd communicated in nods and paper airplanes and careful silence, opened his mouth and said, "Don't be scared." The words were rough, separated by breath, but they were words. Audrey's eyes filled. "Oh, Leo, I'm here." He was using their code, giving it back to her. She crossed the space between them and knelt, eye level again, and said, "You found your voice. Not lost, just hiding." Outside, car doors slammed. Flashlight beams cut through the broken windows. Someone tried the church door, found it barred. A voice called out, not friendly, not safe. Audrey pulled out her phone, texted Finn, "Serena," Detective Blake's direct line that she'd saved, just in case. Then she and Leo sat against the far wall, her arm around his shoulders, his small frame pressed against hers, and they breathed together in the pattern she'd taught him. Mouth, sound, courage. Dante received the recording at 11 at night. Finn had been wearing a wire since the parking lot incident, insurance against Corbin's increasingly erratic decisions. The audio was clear. Corbin instructing the dirty cop to make the teacher disappear and stage it, like the kid ran away with her. Dante listened once. Then he made 4 phone calls. Then he armed himself and got in his car. Detective Henry Blake received a different message. An anonymous file drop containing evidence of police corruption tied to the Moretti organization, but specifically to Corbin Russo, including bank records and the original, unaltered autopsy report from Dante's wife's death. The report that had been sealed 3 years ago, the report that showed tampering with the brake line before the accident. Henry Blake, who'd been chasing shadows for 2 years, suddenly had a choice between his prejudice and his duty. The convoy arrived at the church at 11:32. Dante's vehicles, Blake's unmarked car, and behind them, media still following the story, cameras rolling. Inside the church, Audrey and Leo heard engines, shouting, and then gunfire. Not inside, but close. The sound of a confrontation spilling into violence. Dante entered through the front door, which Corbin's men had finally forced open. He had a gun in his hand, and his face held the expression of someone who'd made a final decision. Corbin was behind him, his own weapon drawn, his last play about to be made. And Leo, seeing his father with a gun, seeing the man who'd killed his mother standing in the shadows, did something that changed 3 lives. He stood up and screamed, "Dad, stop!" Not broken words, not whispered fragments. A clear, loud, complete sentence. Dante froze. The gun in his hand suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. "Don't," Leo said, and his voice was stronger now, surer. "Don't be like him." Corbin raised his weapon, but Finn was faster. The guard who'd watched everything, who'd recorded everything, who'd finally chosen sides, tackled Corbin and disarmed him in 3 efficient movements. Detective Blake entered behind them, badge visible, backup streaming in. "Corbin Russo, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. 3 years ago, and today." But Dante didn't move. He stared at his son, at this child who'd been silent for 6 months, who'd just spoken to save his soul. Dante dropped the gun. He crossed the space between them and fell to his knees in front of Leo. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Leo wrapped his arms around his father's neck. A 7-year-old boy, holding a broken man, and said, "I forgive you." Audrey, watching from where she sat against the wall, felt something in her chest crack open, not breaking, opening. When Dante finally looked at her, his eyes were wet. "Thank you," he said, "for teaching him that." "I didn't teach him forgiveness," Audrey replied. "He taught me courage." The evidence against Corbin was overwhelming once Detective Blake started actually looking. The altered brake line report, the payments to the dirty cops, the conspiracy to frame Audrey, and beneath it all, a simple truth. Corbin had wanted power, had eliminated Dante's wife to create emotional leverage, and had been slowly positioning himself to take over. Dante cooperated with authorities, provided testimony, made a deal that involved withdrawal from his criminal operations in exchange for witness protection for Leo and immunity for past crimes, with the exception of those directly resulting in violence. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was accountability. The media narrative shifted. The teacher who gave a voice appeared in headlines. Audrey declined interviews, but Serena Hall spoke on her behalf, explaining trauma-informed teaching, selective mutism, and the importance of safe, appropriate physical contact in healing. Constance Whitaker resigned. The school board issued a formal apology to Audrey and offered her a permanent contract. She accepted, with conditions: smaller class sizes, mandatory trauma training for all staff, and a quiet room for students who needed sensory breaks. Dante, processing his own grief and guilt, established a fund in his late wife's name. The Audrey Project, supporting therapy for traumatized children. The irony of the name wasn't lost on anyone, but Audrey allowed it because the money would help kids who had no other options. Leo began formal speech and language therapy, combining breathing techniques, safe touch protocols, and gradual exposure exercises. His progress wasn't linear. Some days he spoke in full sentences. Some days he reverted to writing. But the silence was no longer a prison. 3 months after the church, Leo stood in front of his class and read aloud for the first time. The passage was one sentence. "The day my teacher hugged me, fear lost its power." He'd written it himself. 1 year later, Riverside Academy had a new quiet room, funded by the Audrey Project, painted in soft blues and greens. On the wall, in vinyl letters, "Kindness is not weakness." Leo, now 8.5, read to the younger students twice a week. His voice was still quiet, but it was his. He kept a box of paper airplanes on his desk, occasionally leaving them for classmates who looked like they needed a message. Dante stood outside the classroom, watching through the observation window Serena had once offered him. His hands shook. He'd been standing there for 10 minutes, unable to cross the threshold. Audrey, noticing him, stepped into the hallway. "You can come in. He wants you to. I don't know how to be the father he needs. You're learning," she said gently. "That's what matters." She gestured toward the classroom. Leo had seen his father through the window and was looking at him with an expression that held invitation, not fear. Dante took a breath, the kind Leo had learned from Audrey. In for 3 counts and out for 3, and stepped through the door. Leo crossed the room and hugged his father, simple and certain. Audrey watched from the side, and after a moment, Leo reached out his hand to her. She joined them, completing the circle, 3 people learning together what safety could look like. The classroom around them continued its ordinary day. Children read. Sunlight angled through windows. A paper airplane rested on a desk, waiting to be unfolded. And in that moment, in that small, quiet room where broken things learned to mend, kindness proved itself strong enough to hold an empire of pain and transform it into something that looked like hope. Outside, the world kept turning, complicated and imperfect. But inside, 3 people breathed together, in rhythm, in peace, learning the simplest and hardest truth. That touch, when given with intention and received with trust, could rebuild what violence had torn down. The story didn't end there. Stories like this never really end. They just grow, reaching forward into days where Leo would struggle and succeed, where Dante would face consequences and make amends, where Audrey would continue teaching children that their wounds didn't define their worth. But for now, in that golden hour of afternoon light, the only sound was breathing. 3 hearts finding the same rhythm. One embrace saying what words couldn't. "I'm here. You're safe. We're learning together." And in that learning, a kind of magic that wasn't magic at all. Just the patient, deliberate work of healing. One moment at a time.